Stephanie St. Clair, December 24, 1897, December 1969, was an American gambler who ran numerous criminal enterprises in Harlem, New York, in the early part of the 20th century. St. Clair resisted the interests of the mafia for several years after Prohibition ended. She continued to be an independent operator and never came under mafia control. She ran a successful numbers game in Harlem and was an activist for the black community. Her nicknames included Queenie, Madam Queen, Madam St. Clair, and Queen of the Policy Rackets. Early life. Stephanie St. Clair was born of mixed French and African descent in the West Indies to a single mother, Felicia N., who worked hard to send her daughter to school. According to St. Clair's 1924 Declaration of Intention, she gave Moule Grande Terre, French West Indies, present-day Guadeloupe, West Indies, as her place of birth, not Martinique as has usually been cited. When Stephanie turned 15, her mother became very ill and she had to leave school. She was employed as a maid by a rich family, where she was repeatedly raped by the son. She managed to save some money and, after the death of her mother, finally left Guadeloupe for France in 1912. Even though she could read and write, a rare quality for a black woman at the time, she could not find decent employment. She immigrated to the United States via Marseille on the Guyana, arriving in New York on July 31, 1911. She used the long voyage and subsequent quarantine to learn English. In Harlem, she fell in love with a small-time crook, Duke, who soon tried to prostitute her. Enraged, she stabbed a fork into his eye and promptly left New York on a bus. The following night, the bus was stopped by the Ku Klux Klan. Several black passengers were hanged or burned alive in front of her, and she was repeatedly raped. Following this incident, she returned to New York, learning that Duke had been shot in a fight between gangs. After 4 months, she decided to start her own business, selling controlled drugs with the help of her new boyfriend, Ed. Much of this speculation about St. Clair's early life is derived from an biographical novel, Madame St. Clair, Reign to Harlem, by Martinican author Raphael Confont, available in English translation as Madame St. Clair, Queen of Harlem. After a few months, she had made $30,000 and told Ed she wanted to leave him and start her own business. Ed tried to strangle her and she pushed him away with such force that he cracked his skull against a table and died. For months afterwards, she employed her own men, bribed cops, and on April 12, 1917, invested $10,000 of her own money in a clandestine lottery game in Harlem. As a result of her success running one of the leading numbers games in the city, she became known throughout Manhattan as Queenie, but Harlem residents referred to her as Madame St. Clair. Numbers game involvement. She was involved in policy banking, an admixture of investing, gambling, and playing the lottery. Many banks at this time would not accept black customers, so they were not able to invest legally. Policy banking wasn't technically legal, but it was the only way for black individuals living in Harlem to invest their money. In this way she used the underground economy in Harlem to address race politics. At this time the numbers game in Harlem was male-dominated and St. Clair was one of the only women involved. St. Clair helped the black community in Harlem by providing many with jobs as numbers runners and other jobs within her business. Because of her success in the numbers game, she lived a lavish life, making over $20,000 a year in the 1920s. Police corruption. St. Clair was known to put out ads in the local newspapers educating the Harlem community about their legal rights, advocating for voting rights, and calling out police brutality against the black community. Several times she complained to local authorities about harassment by the police. When they paid no heed, she ran advertisements in Harlem newspapers, accusing senior police officers of corruption. The police responded by arresting her on a trumped-up charge, and she spent 8 months in a workhouse. In response, she testified to the Seabury Commission about the kickbacks she had paid police officers and those who had participated in the Harlem numbers game. The commission subsequently fired more than a dozen police officers. Conflict with the mafia. After the end of Prohibition, Jewish and Italian-American crime families saw a decrease in profits and decided to move in on the Harlem gambling scene. Bronx-based mob boss Dutch Schultz was the first to move in, beating and killing numbers operators who would not pay him protection. St. Clair and her chief enforcer Ellsworth "Bumpy" Johnson refused to pay protection to Schultz, despite the violence and intimidation by police they faced. St. Clair responded by attacking the storefronts of businesses that ran Dutch Schultz's betting operations and tipping off the police about him. This resulted in the police raiding his house, arresting more than a dozen of his employees and seizing approximately $12 million, about $172 million in 2019 currency. St. Clair never submitted to Dutch Schultz like many others in Harlem eventually did. After St. Clair's struggles with Schultz, she had to become legitimate and stay away from the police, so she passed on her criminal business to Bumpy Johnson. Eventually her former enforcer negotiated with Lucky Luciano, and Lucky took over Schultz's spots, with a percentage going to Bumpy. The Italians then had to go to Bumpy first if they had any problems in Harlem. Luciano realized that the struggle with the five families was hurting their business, so Schultz was assassinated in 1935 on the orders of the commission. Although St. Clair was not involved with his murder, she was remembered for sending an infamous telegram to his bed that stated, "As ye sow, so shall ye reap." The telegram reportedly made headlines across the nation. By the 1940s, Bumpy Johnson had become the reigning king in Harlem, while St. Clair became less and less involved in the numbers game. Later life. After St. Clair retired from the numbers game, she started a new era of her life as an advocate for political reform. In the late 1930s, St. Clair met her husband, Sufi Abdul Hamid, known as the Black Hitler for his anti-Semitic, Nazi fashion of activism. Hamid was a militant activist and was the leader of an Islamic Buddhist cult. St. Clair and Hamid's marriage went downhill quickly when he started cheating with a black fortune teller known as Fufutum. Hamid and Futum attempted to open a business with St. Clair's money, and their marriage officially ended in 1938 when Hamid was shot. St. Clair was charged for shooting at him and spent 10 years in the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in New York. After she was released from prison, St. Clair continued her work in informing those in the community of their civil liberties. She continued to write columns in the local newspaper about discrimination, police brutality, illegal search raids, and other issues facing the black community. Death. She died quietly and still wealthy in 1969, shortly before her 73rd birthday. 1 year earlier, Bumpy Johnson, who came back to live with her and to write poetry, had died. Portrayals. Portrayed by Novella Nelson in the 1984 film The Cotton Club. Portrayed by Cicely Tyson in the 1997 film Hoodlum. Portrayed by Fulani Haynes and Catherine Butler-Jones' 2007 play, 409 Edgecombe Ave, The House on Sugar Hill. Portrayed by Alexandra Afraya in a 2014 episode of the TV One series Celebrity Crime Files. References. External links. Court TV''S Crime Library. Harlem Gangs from the 1920s and 1930s. Harlem Godfather. The Rap on My Husband, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. Hoodlum, 1997 on IMDb. Podcast. No Man's Land. Queenie episode. Stephanie St. Clair at Find a Grave.